Good morning. Today, I will be differentiating the terms listed on the screen. So first, we have the experimental unit versus the sampling unit. So experimental unit is a unit or group of units to which a single treatment is applied. While sampling unit, on the other hand, is a portion of the experimental unit on which the response variable is measured and observed. So, example, an experiment was made in an attempt to determine whether heat stress affects the sugar level of albino mice. So, 3 albino mice were subjected to heat stress after a meal, 1 hour after a meal, every single day for 1 month. So, after a month, 3 blood samples were collected from each mice. Then, gina-examine sila, i-analyze for glucose levels. So, sa ato nga example, ato nga i-determine as sa teto nga part ang experimental unit ug ang sampling unit. So, the experimental unit in this experiment is the albino mouse. So, daghan man sila, so albino mice. So, sila ang experimental unit. While ang sampling unit, since ang sampling unit is a portion sa experimental unit, so meaning, ang sampling unit nato is something nga part lang gihapon sa albino mice. So, in this experiment, our sampling unit is the blood which contains glucose para matest ang glucose levels. So, atong experimental unit, albino mice, sampling unit, blood. So, now let us proceed to treatment structure versus design structure. So, a treatment structure is defined as a set or a combination of treatments selected by the researcher for comparison. So, statisticians use the term treatment as a general term for any set of comparison. So, for example, you want to compare the body size of a lizard species in 2 different islands. So, the 2 islands would be the treatment. So, medyo libog, diba? So, the term is somewhat tilted. So, usahay, confusing siya. The term treatment is sometimes confusing for many ecological studies. For example, kadto sa lizard o island, diba? Murag medyo libog siya. So, for ecological studies, usahay libog ang ang term nga treatment. Pero, the term treatment fits quite well for studies in which manipulation is applied to a set of plots or chambers. So, for example, increased CO2, normal CO2, or reduced CO2 affecting grass growth. So, di ba, dali kaayo i-determine kung asa ang treatment. So, of course, ang treatment is ang CO2, ang, di ba, increased CO2, normal CO2, reduced CO2. So, mo to siya ang treatment factors. So, treatment factors can be either qualitative or quantitative. Ano siya ang treatment structure. So, design structure, on the other hand, specifies the rules by which the treatments are to be allocated to the experimental units into groups or blocks. So, the design structure is the central issue of any experimental design and covers much of the material this chapter deals with. So, di ba, may treatment na sa treatment structure. So, kana nga treatment, imo na siya nga i-distribute sa experimental units. So, mo na siya nga mag-design ka og either blocking or groupings, o by block or by groups, i-design nimo para nga ma-distribute independently ang kada treatment sa kada experimental units. Mo na siya ang design structure. And most importantly, ang kini nga design structure is nagdepend ni siya sa scientific questions being asked. Scientific questions or research questions. So last but not the least, we have the one-way treatment structure versus the factorial treatment structure. So, the one-way treatment structure is comprised of levels of a single factor. So, meaning, isa lang ka factor, pero damo na levels. While factorial treatment structure, on the other hand, is simply the case in which the treatments are created by combining two or more factors. So, para mas ma-clarify, let us have some examples. So, example number 1 para sa one-way treatment structure na example. So, an experiment is conducted to determine the effects of different amounts of sulfur dioxide. So, in here we have 3 different amounts of sulfur dioxide. First, we have 0.6 ppm or parts per millions, 0.3 ppm, and 1.2 ppm. So, we are to determine the effects of these different amounts of sulfur dioxide on soybean reproduction. So, we have 2 soybean plants were used in the experiment to be treated with each amount of sulfur dioxide. So, in this case, this is called the one-way treatment structure. Kaya nga naman, so diba, ang one-way treatment structure is comprised of levels pero sa single nga factor. So, here we have a single factor which is the sulfur dioxide. Siyang single factor, usa lang ka-treatment which is the sulfur dioxide, pero kana siya may tulo ka levels which are 0.6 parts per million, 0.3 parts per million, and 1.2 parts per million. So, this is an example of a one-way treatment structure. Usa lang ka factor, single factor, pero may 3 ka levels. So, now let us proceed to other examples sa example sa factorial treatment structure. So, ito nga i-recall nga ang factorial treatment structure is treatment siya nga nabuo gamit ang 2 or more factors. So, this example, so I used to take apple slices during lunches. So, we didn't want the apples to brown, di ba? Kay ang apple kay ma-brown siya kung imong i-slice then ibilin lang nga open. So, we didn't want the apples to brown. And various suggestions were made about keeping the slices cold and or lowering the surface pH levels. So, muna siya ang situation. So, this situation, I could experiment to test browning with 4 treatments. I have 4 treatments. Room temperature plus no lemon juice. So, ang temperature is equal to room temperature pero no lemon juice. That is my first treatment. Then second treatment, room temperature with lemon juice. So, ibutang nako ang apple sa room temperature, apple slice sa room temperature, while naa siya, gibutangan pud nako siya og lemon juice. Then, third treatment, ibutang nako ang apple sa cool nga place, either sa refrigerator, pero walay lemon juice. And fourth treatment is, ibutang nako ang apple sa cool gihapon nga place, pero may lemon juice. So, unsa man ang atong ma-observe ing ani? So, ma-observe nato nga natay duha ka factors nga ginabalik-balik sa atong upat ka treatments, di ba? We have the temperature and the lemon juice. So, muna siya, duha ka factors gi-combine to form treatments. So, from duha ka factors nakabuo ko og 4 ka treatments gikan sa pag-combination sa duha ka factors. So, to siya ang factorial treatment structure.